look at the book of Esther, which is written right in the middle of the period of the time that we've been studying, about 483 to 473, 10 full years covering the book of Esther. And we looked yesterday at a little deeper look at Esther, and that is the fact that we see the unreasonable demand of the king, the improper response by the queen, the problem that it caused, and applying that to marriage relationships, as well as the influence of alcohol on our thinking. And I thought some pretty good lessons for all of us to think about as we think about the book of Esther. Today we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take a little deeper look than just the fact that God ordained Esther to be queen to protect her people. We know that she refused the king. He became angry. And I think it's pretty interesting that when the king was angry and still under the influence of alcohol, perhaps, there were some of his advisors that decided that this was a good time to make sure no other women did this. I think they had vested interest, if you will. So in verses 16 through 18, we find that they were concerned about other wives doing this to their husbands, and since the woman was looked on as a lesser citizen, they kind of prompted the king and suggested to the king that he make an edict that Vesti could never again appear before the king, and that that would be a lesson to all of the women of the kingdom, that they would have to be in subservient relationship with their husbands and not ever speak out against anything that their husbands said or did. When we come into chapter 2, I thought there was a very interesting passage of scripture there in chapter 2, verse 1. And I couldn't find a lot of support, for my opinion, in the standard commentaries, because they take a very narrow view of the book of Esther as being just a God-ordained person to protect the kingdom of Israel and to make sure that the people of Israel were not annihilated. And then finally, I saw another true application of when they started to look for a new queen for this situation, that when we got over to chapter, it appears that in chapter 2, verses 2 through 4, that the only criteria for a good queen was that she be a virgin and that she be attractive. In other words, it was a beauty contest. But let's start to break this down. Let's go back and take a look at the vested interest of other men and their concern for their wives being disobedient in any way to them. And then we'll take a look at another section. In the presence of the king and the princes, Mechem asked Queen Vesti has wronged not only the king, but also all of the princes and all of the peoples and all of the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands by saying, King Ahasuerus commanded Vesti to be brought into his presence, but she did not come. This day the ladies of Persia and Media will have heard of the queen's conduct and will speak in the same way to all of the king's princes. There will be plenty of contempt and anger. Well, you can clearly see that there was a lot of vested interest for these men to be in continued power over their wives and over the women of the community, and so you can see this vested interest that they all had, and there's no room for any negotiation and no room for any mutual respect. But take a look at this next section as we see this one verse that really struck me, and that's chapter 2, verse 1. After these things, when the anger of the king of Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vesti and what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. It's quite interesting here because it struck me immediately that the king had thought about what a wonderful relationship he had with Vashti, and that maybe in his anger and maybe in his under the influence of alcohol, he had said some things and done some things that he wished he hadn't. Now, I tried to find some other commentaries that took the same position that I did, and wasn't able to find very much about that until I came across some writings in a commentary that Josephus, who wrote around the historical events of this time, uh, worded the thing like this, that maybe the king had exceeding grief. He was too fast to talk and not patient enough to listen. Let me say that again. And I think it's a lesson all of us could learn. He was a little too slow to listen and a little too fast to talk. And maybe now he regretted his edict. I think that happens in a lot of relationships. We say something we wish we hadn't said, and because of our own pride, we don't want to go back and take it back. Not only that, but what's been said is really hard for other people to forget. So I think this is a very interesting point that we need to apply to our lives. Be careful that we don't act in anger or under the influence of any kind of substance and say something or do something that we'll later regret, because I think that's exactly what happened here to the king. Let's take a look at the last final point, and that is this beauty contest that was going to be done to find a new virgin, beautiful woman that would please the king. And let's compare that with 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Let's look at those. In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, and as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. Your adornment must not merely be external braiding of hair, or wearing gold jewelry, or putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, with an imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also, who hoped in God, used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham and called him Lord. You have become her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. You husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her the honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. To sum it all up, of you being harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit, not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead, for you were called for the very purpose that you might inherit a blessing. If you just take scripture out of context, at first it sounds like the king was fully justified in the fact that his wife was not showing her the respect that he deserved. But if you look at this passage of scripture from the New Testament in 1 Peter, you'll find that there is a part on his part to treat her as a joint heir, to treat her with respect, not to command, not to insist. And if he was that kind of a husband, I don't think she'd have had any problem at all in coming out and seeing his guests. But because he was so demanding and because he did not respect her as an equal, the outcome was quite bad for everyone involved. So let's be sure that we show the respect for one another that we should. Let's be sure that we realize we're all equal in God's eyes. And let's understand that being in submission does not mean being a doormat. And that's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.